We have got Ellie here, our wonderful ecologist, and we've got Julia, our rewilding manager, and we are pretty much 1 year into our rewilding project. So we've asked Ellie to come and have a look to see what's been happening over the past 12 months and to see what's different because we've been rewilding. What did you say, Ellie?
I think this pond creation is fantastic and it couldn't have gone any better. I can't believe how much water is in it, especially considering all the dry weather. It's just holding water amazingly.
The thing that astonished me was that we just dug a hole and then we had the driest period we've had for ages and the pond stayed full. Like, no lining. We could have spent £10,000–15,000 on a liner. Didn't need it.
Yeah, it's worked so well. And I guess you used all of the different water sources around the site and made sure that they were all coming here now instead of kind of artificially being piped away in different directions. So you've made use of it instead of diverting it off your land and making it somebody else's problem, which is really, really good.
So we've got a new pond, and in the making of the pond we've disturbed the ground, and we've got some, we had some bare soil, and we already had nettles, but now we have more nettles and we have more creeping thistle, which was probably already there, and it's now got the conditions to wake up and thrive. And with the nettles is coming, I think, more peacock butterflies, and here's the caterpillars to prove it. So there is it's just interesting to see that.
Ow! They are definitely nettles.
Getting attacked by the nettles. So
yeah, there's species that have benefited from the disturbance that you've created.
And the peacock butterfly is a native Scottish species that we want.
Yeah, luckily any of the species that have come in that people would consider to be weed species are native species. So they do have a wildlife benefit to our native species, and they won't persist forever. They're just taking advantage of that disturbance that was caused by the creation of the pond, and if we give it time, then they'll become less and less dominant. But whilst they are here, they are giving benefits to our native wildlife, like the peacock butterflies. So yeah, if this is kind of like artificially enriched from all that topsoil when you created the arena, not you, when you guys created the arena, then the netters will probably persist for a bit longer. But the creeping thistle will get less and less dominant because they rely on disturbance, which you're not going to be continuously doing.
And if we change the water levels because you want to create more of a seepage of water from one pond to the other pond, the nettles and the creeping thistle won't necessarily like that very much because all of a sudden they're sitting in water. Is that right?
Yeah. So you'll start to get species that are more kind of bog-loving species, wet-loving species coming in.
So why is the successive process of whatever it is, herbs, nettles, docks, broom, gorse, why is that an important stage in rewilding? Why should we let that happen and not just go straight to the trees?
Well, it's important to allow natural vegetation succession wherever possible because we're trying to move towards restoring natural processes. Natural vegetation succession is a natural process, and during natural vegetation succession you have this succession of different plant communities, and each one that comes along will be changing the conditions of that ground
and soil,
creating the right conditions for the next stage in succession. And each step along that process is beneficial to different species of biodiversity as well. So what we want to try and restore is every step in that process of succession across a whole landscape, and that's how you would maximise the number of species that you could support within the landscape. Yeah, I love the diversity that you've created here in the process of removing some of the non-native Norway spruce. You've created lots of different types of deadwood habitat, which is really cool. You've got these brash piles, you've got the dead standing wood, and then you've got those trees that you've just felled over and they've still got all of their branches on. They create loads of kind of protective brash habitat for lots of different species, especially birds will absolutely love that cover.
This was just didn't have any leaves or any growth until the top, but now that the spruce are down and the light's in, this birch has decided to sprout further down. Now it's got a bit of light.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? So here we go. So we've stripped some of the Norway spruce, as you can see around us. We've let the light in. This was a very dark area of wood. This silver birch has been here for quite a long time, but the light's come in and the birch is sprouting low down.
Yeah.
What's going on here, Ellie?
So now that the deer fence is up, we've excluded the main source of the browsing pressure and taken out some of the really dark shade casting species like Norway spruce. We've got this blackthorn lawn that's popped up, which is amazing, and once that grows properly it will be completely covered in blossom in the summer, and it will also provide a kind of protection nursery for other more palatable species of trees like oak, for example, to grow within that thorny protection of the blackthorn. So we're removing the spruce from this woodland that the red squirrels love, but we already have, because we've addressed the ecological barriers to tree regeneration. We've got oak and hazel, which are the native species that provide food for things like red squirrels, and they're coming up now.
When you say we've redressed the ecological barriers to regeneration, what do you...
Put up the deer fence to stop the deer coming in and stopped grazing the land heavily with sheep.
Did you get the hazel?
Did you get the hazel?
I haven't
Sorry,
got the hazel.
I was meaning to kind of
That's hazel.
prompt you there, and then you do that.
Yeah, no.
This frog only exists because of Nature Scott's funding for rewilding Lettoch.
What have you got to say, Frog?
Rivet,
Any thank yous?
rivet. This is a conversation about whether we do some conservation grazing in our open meadows, because we've planted some trees and we're worried about them getting trampled. So we're joining the conversation halfway through.
And we're talking a little bit about what's come in. So we're talking a little bit about the scrub type species that we were talking about earlier, like creeping thistle, like nettle, like docks. These species coming in after 2 years of no sheep. But we quite liked the harebells and the whatever flowers we saw 2 years ago, and we're sort of trying to work out how much we just let it all happen and how much intervention to make.
Yeah, so like on a project of this scale, conservation grazing logistically will be difficult because you don't have enough ground to have animals year round.
Yeah.
So what you'd be looking for is to borrow conservation animals, probably cattle, for a short period at the beginning and end, or just the end of each season, to maintain open habitat. And because you've deer fenced it and you've removed the sheep, if you don't have any conservation grazing, this will transition very gradually to woodland. That doesn't mean that it would be wall-to-wall closed canopy woodland. You can have open habitat without grazing, but you probably wouldn't have species like the harebell, for example.
Our dream is maximum biodiversity, so that is our starting point, is how can we let this landscape recover in the way that it needs to, but with this sort of sense of maximising the biodiversity potential of the site, and that's in line with our funding, and that's what we said we would do. And then we get stuck every now and again, because when you stop doing what you've been doing in terms of, say, grazing, then you start to panic because there
You
is a lot
start
of
losing
bad.
species that were
Well, that and also
benefiting from that.
and people
yeah.
are saying, oh, docks are really bad, thistles are really bad, gorse is really bad, it's ugly, it's messy, it's this, that and the other, and then you become quite influenced by these sort of more traditional land management styles or opinions, and then you lose your direction a bit because you're being pushed in different directions,
Yeah.
and you kind of then try and, because you're not an expert in this, you kind of don't know what the best thing to do to kind of keep you on track,
Yeah.
which is why we want you to help us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think that the ideal scenario would be to have some grazing in here, and I am mostly saying that because you do have some really nice little seams of calcareous grassland, which is quite a rare habitat and has quite unique flowers that are associated with it, which would be nice to keep, but I think it would also be a really valuable site if it was just left to be more native woodland than anything else. So I think you need to investigate the options of who you could potentially borrow conservation cattle from, if anyone, in the area. With animals, you don't want to ideally be transporting them that far, because that's not a pleasurable experience for them.
And you say conservation animals as opposed to cows from the neighbouring farm.
Yeah.
Is that different?
So like, yeah, when people say conservation, or when I say conservation animals, I'm generally talking about like old heritage breeds of domesticated animals, which will mimic the behaviour of our ancient grazers and browsers that we used to have. A kind of highlight is that difference between cattle and sheep is that sheep basically like mow. They use their teeth to graze the ground or the vegetation, sorry, and they also selectively eat flower heads. So what you end up with is a very tight lawn of often only grass or grass with herbs in there, but they're not able to flower. Whereas cattle, they use their tongue and they wrap it around vegetation and they rip it off. So they create a much more diverse sward and they don't selectively eat the flowers. So if you want to create a kind of flowering grassland, then sheep are not ideal.
But maybe the year after
I think it would be good to start putting the feelers out and see if there's anybody locally who keeps organic cattle and they don't use wormers in the dream scenario.
Yeah.
It's hard to find. That would be willing to bring a couple of cattle here for like a couple of weeks at the end of the season or at the beginning of the season.
Like literally like a couple of cattle.
Well, it would be a trial and error process of working out how many cattle this ground can take for how long to add that natural disturbance but not
decimate it.
Yeah,
because that's my biggest fear, is because there's so much lovely regen coming up. There's loads of silver birch and stuff. I would hate just to eat it all. And
but you've got to go with what you would love, and that's really, really important part of this project. Whilst it is rewilding,
plus
small.
It'll be a learning process for this site, and it would be the same for every site. Like if you brought cattle in for 3 weeks and you got 3 cattle for 3 weeks and they completely decimated the regen, then you've been knocked back, but it will come back and you've learned. That's too much. I think this is perfect habitat.
This is perfect habitat.
Yeah. I mean, look at all the orchids. I've never seen so many.
It is completely stunning,
I've
isn't
never
it?
seen that density.
Density of orchids. Yeah, look. So we've got creeping willow, which is this. What's so cool about creeping willow?
It's just not that common. It's a willow species that we don't see that much, and it's really cool to see it here at not a super high altitude. generally the creeping species are at quite high altitude.
What's been caught in there?
That's the seeds. That's creeping willow seeds that are
Whoa.
coming from the catkins.
And where is this coming from, or was it already here?
What do you mean?
What I
where's
mean,
it coming
what I mean by that is was this already here before we took the sheep off? And
Oh
it's
yeah,
now?
definitely. It's been clinging on for a long time, but it's just gone for it this year.
That's so cool.
It is so cool. Yeah, if we just look around and take a pan, there's the abundance of flowers here is so high. I'd say even within just a year of the kind of rewilding process, this is a huge success.